is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
A pleasant good night to you and welcome to the People's Business. I'm your host, Shane Seeley. And tonight we are talking about the topic that is on everyone's tongues, COVID-19, isolation, vaccination, and misinformation. And the doctors are in the house to break it all down for you. Tonight we have with us Dr. Hilary Moore. She is the head of the mobile vaccine unit, the coordinator of that. We also have Dr. Joy St. John. She is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency. And Dr. Adanna Grandison. She is the Consultant Manager of the Home Isolation Program. So we have a lot to talk about, all of those latest updates on COVID-19 here in Barbados. And a lot of people have been talking about relaxation of the curfew. But we will get into all of that in a few moments as we talk about COVID-19, isolation, vaccination, and misinformation right here on the People's Business. Don't go anywhere. It's all about COVID-19 here on the People's Business tonight, and let's look at the latest update in terms of those daily dashboards that we get so that we get a sense of what is going on with COVID-19 here in our community. That start figure at the bottom, 8 deaths today. Well, in this latest one, this is from November the 6th. So the total number of deaths here in Barbados has risen to 180. And there were 238 new cases of COVID-19 out of 1,503 tests conducted by the Best Dos Santos Public Health Laboratory. As we're focusing on isolation tonight, let's look at those isolation numbers. In isolation facilities, we have 928 people, and in home isolation, 6,513. And that's where we will start tonight, looking at that home isolation program. Also, vaccination numbers, as you would have seen there, not really moving that much, still hovering around that 50% mark. So there's still a lot of vaccine hesitancy in Barbados. Of course, we'll get the update here tonight on the People's Business, and we will get a regional perspective as well. So the doctors are in the house. We have an all-ladies panel tonight, all doing really, really good work throughout this pandemic. You've been so busy, and I really want to start by thanking you for your service to your communities here in Barbados, and of course for you, Dr. St. John, right across the region. And we need you to continue this service throughout till we get this COVID-19 situation under control. But the Delta variant has really changed the game. We've never seen COVID-19 spread like it has over the past few months. Every day, triple-digit cases here now in Barbados, as was predicted would happen with this Delta variant. And the curfew doesn't seem to be doing much to stem the tide of the Delta variant. Let's start with this home isolation. Dr. Grandison, I want to start with you so that you can give us an update on the program. The last time we spoke, I quoted the figures to you, and then you said, well, really and truly, they were a bit higher. So 6,500 plus people in home isolation. What is the current situation?
So currently, as we speak, we have 6,671 persons in community. That is as of 8:05, because I'm looking at the active dashboard. Of those, we have 33 persons who are critical that we would want to move emergently to central isolation facilities, for instance, Black Mangala, QC, Arson Point, or even some of the other satellite facilities. And these persons need to be moved to be assessed in person by doctors. We also have 299 yellow cases which need to be moved urgently. So, for instance, our red cases, we like to get them out of the community within 1 hour, whereas our yellow cases, we aim to move them out of community within a 24-hour period. There are several reasons a person, especially in the yellow category, can become yellow. And it really has to do with safety for the patient themselves, or safety for the other persons within the home. So we can have social reasons or medical reasons to move a person from within the home to give them the best care that they need. The overwhelming majority of persons, however, are green at this point in time. We have 4,320 persons who we consider to be safe to continue to isolate at home. Also, we have 115 banded persons within that group of green individuals who have met criteria for banding, as we discussed previously. That 18 to now 50 age category is our cohort of banded individuals. But I want to also state to you that we have had, from the very beginning of the program, 3,377 persons safely discharged from the program, which is actually quite significant. In addition to that, we also have 157 persons who would have been essentially transferred into facility for that review in person, and the central isolation facility thought that they were now safe to be returned currently at this point in time. And this number fluctuates quite often throughout the day to continue their isolation at home. But most alarmingly and concerningly for me are the 375 persons who have currently refused transportation within the program. And why is it concerning? Because we know that these persons, especially for medical reasons, require not only to be assessed, but also require the medical intervention to help them based upon the symptoms that they would have displayed. And so it is a plea I am asking all Barbadians, because once you're assessed and you are given, according to our traffic light system, a designation within that traffic light system, it does not always mean you will stay at that designated color code for the entire duration of your illness. So my plea really is that if for whatever reason a medical assessor has assessed you, or you are demonstrating symptoms in keeping with a need for escalation of care, that these persons would accept the transport and certainly accept the care.
Okay, that's a lot to digest, and there are some key points that we want to come back to discuss, especially those 115 banded individuals and the electronic tagging system in the whole. But let's go over now to Dr. Hilary Moore. She's with the mobile vaccine unit. She's been trying to encourage more people in the community to get vaccinated. Dr. Moore, I know it's been an uphill battle for you, and getting that feedback, I know you get those conversations all the time, people asking you why they should get vaccinated, why shouldn't I be afraid of the vaccination? How is that message going, getting to those people in the community, getting the message to those people in community so that they can actually get the jab?
It has been actually a big challenge. There are lots. Okay, so the people that were really interested in getting vaccinated are already vaccinated. The group that we're trying to target, or we need to target right now, are those that are on the fence that they're not anti-vaxxers. They're just, hesitant to get in the vaccines. It's trying to really figure out what is their hesitancies so that they can be addressed properly. And that is where a major challenge is occurring. There are people that are hesitant, but they can't really say why they are. So it's very difficult to try to, address that, have a conversation when they're not even 100% sure. But these are also people that, then we also have a big chunk of people that aren't even interested in having the conversation. They don't even want to hear anything about it. They've just decided, I'm not having it. Not that they wouldn't take other vaccines. They've just, decided they're not going to. And I think that that is where our major challenge is occurring. It's not just here in Barbados. This is happening all over the world. But that is the group that we really are struggling to get vaccinated. And if you look at the dashboard, you would notice that consistently there's like a 20 to 21,000 difference. So it does look like it, and it does imply that there are people who would have had the first dose that have not had their second doses. And we really need to figure out why it is that they're so scared of getting the second dose. And we also need to start targeting like the under 35, 40 age group, because these are the parents of the 12 to 17 age groups that have also not been coming forward as much as we would really like them to get their vaccines. How can we really dispense the myths and the concerns? I don't think that people really want to get lectures. I don't agree with lectures. If you lecture me, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm going to forget half of what you said. I think people really need one-on-one or like one and small group conversations. But then it's also, how do you get to target those specific groups? We do have a really major challenge, especially with the fact that Delta variant is around. So we really can't do the in-person, which for a lot of people, that's what they like. People like the in-person, let's be real. As human beings, we like that human interaction. Figure out a way to have like small Zoom groups with these people. But it really is a big challenge trying to get those hesitant people or those misinformed people informed correctly and in a way that they appreciate. We want to have a conversation with them. I don't like being talked at. I don't believe in talking at people either. So I would like to have conversations with them, but it's now trying to find a medium and a way of actually reaching these people. That is a major challenge. We've also been having some challenges where people say they want the vaccine. We arrive to give them the vaccine. We've actually had some of their younger relatives bar us from going into the homes to the older people. We've also had some people that, we will call, we're on our way. We call the day before, no problems. When we, on the actual day, we call to say we're on our way, then they change their mind for whatever reason. And this is then putting a lot of spokes in the wheels because, you have a plan, you're going to do a certain amount a day, then you're ending up not doing that amount. You end up with extra vaccines that you may not necessarily use, and we can't put them back in the bottle. So you're ending up having to discard. And so it is really a big challenge, and I'm not 100% sure. I wish I did know the answer about how to really address it. I would honestly like to go into the communities and really talk to the people, but we can't do that as freely because we do have Delta variant, which we know is a lot more easily transmissible than the original COVID-19 variant. So I really don't know. I don't know if we're going to have to maybe set up some meet and greets via Zoom with small groups. I don't know how we can really appeal to the groups that are on the fence, basically.
Understood.
Yeah,
and
it's a challenge.
So how many people has your unit, been able to vaccinate over the period of its operation?
Okay, so that's twofold. So we actually were operating earlier this year, and we had done quite a lot earlier this year, and then we disbanded. But now that we're back, I think we are just above 100 and something. Remembering that we are literally driving to different people's homes to give them their vaccines and to give them their cards and wait a bit and all these different things. So it does take a while. It's different like when you're at a center where you can vaccinate a lot of people. Take it from me, getting the injection isn't a long period. It is doing all the aftercare and the cards and stuff like that. That does take a lot of time. So we've done just over 100 or so, and we would like to do more, but even up to today, it was really cut short because a lot of the people that we spoke to yesterday and we were on our way to see them today, when we called and say, oh, we're on our way to you, oh, we don't want it anymore, we've changed our mind, and that just throws everything completely off. So my thing about it is that even if you're hesitant or you're not sure, believe it or not, most of the times when our teams are calling you to say we're coming to you the next day, generally a lot of them are actually physicians. It's actually a lot of the volunteer doctors that are calling. So if you have questions, ask those questions then. We're amenable to conversations. Tell us what your fears are. Tell us what your issues are. Let us see if we can talk about it and see if we can make you feel more comfortable with the vaccine, as opposed to telling us, yes, 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 come. And then when we're about to come to you, then tell us, no, don't bother.
Wow. Okay, Dr. St. John, I want to bring you in here. Are you seeing that same hesitancy right across the region as you look country to country in terms of the numbers of people who are still unwilling to get vaccinated, sitting on the fence?
Yes, you're quite correct. These stories are repeated across the different countries. And one of the things that CARPHA did is we actually did a survey to check on vaccine hesitancy, the reasons for vaccine hesitancy, who the persons trust and they want to hear messages from, and the media or which technology they want to hear the messages over, so that we would actually have a way of having targeted interventions. And we're right now working with a vaccine hesitancy advisory group drawn from across our member states, so that we will have the cultural and language perspectives, because in our member states we have mainly English and French, but also Dutch and Spanish. So we're working on that. And the stories of someone telling you they want to be vaccinated, and then at the moment refusing, that is not isolated to Barbados either. In fact, we have another expert advisor, and one of those members was telling us how people will actually come and sit in the chair and they talk with them all of the issues, because as Hilary correctly said, when you are looking at behavior change, because vaccine hesitancy is a behavior and getting people to be vaccinated is a behavior change. When you look at vaccine hesitancy, you have to spend one-on-one sessions. And in other countries in the Caribbean, some people are being brave and doing the one-on-one. Of course, they're socially distanced in these chairs. But there are also a lot of online interventions. And it's not going to be easy. It's like the last 10 pounds when you've lost quite a bit of weight.
Wow.
People who are hesitant are the most difficult persons to convince to take the vaccine.
And then it speaks to misinformation, which we will get to in a matter of moments, because some of the things that I'm hearing as reasons for not taking the vaccine are absolutely absurd. And I remember I sent a video to you, Dr. Moore, recently. And I said to you, this was sent to me by a friend who is completely against the vaccine. And I sent it to you, Dr. Moore, to ask you to give an assessment. I'm really sorry that we can't show it to you viewers, because it's not really good for TV. And I wouldn't want that misinformation here on TV8. But Dr. Moore, please, if you can just give a quick assessment of what these doctors were trying to spin, and that people are gobbling up, and it's just getting muddled with what is the correct information as well.
Right, I'm trying to remember exactly which one was that video, because I've received quite a few recently. It seems that if every day there are more and more and more videos giving misinformation where the vaccines are concerned.
This is the one with the Ebola drug and the use of remdesivir.
Right, remdesivir. Right, that was the remdesivir one. No, okay, so first thing first, remdesivir actually is an antiviral medication. It actually was first brought about and tried when they had the Ebola outbreak. No, remember with Ebola has a death rate of over 50%. In other words, at least 1 in every 2 people who get Ebola will die. So remdesivir was one of the drugs being studied as a treatment for Ebola. And what they found is they were actually trying 4 different drugs. And they found that the death rate was a little bit higher for the remdesivir than some of the other drugs that were studied. And then they decided that remdesivir was the worst drug known to man. However, Ebola virus kills 1 in every 2 at the very least people. So it wasn't that the remdesivir increased the death rate. It did decrease it, but it did not decrease it significantly. So when it was around that same, like maybe like 1 in 3, just over 1 that died, then they made it sound like it was the actual drug. It wasn't the actual drug. That was the first part of misinformation. The other thing is ICU. I think people don't understand what being in ICU means. There's a difference between being in a monitored area than being in an ICU setting and being a true ICU patient. If you're in ICU, that means that you're having organs that are failing. Usually, well, not usually, but in a lot of cases, it can be respiratory. That's why they're on ventilators, which is helping them breathe for them. Whether or not they have a really bad infection and they have what we call sepsis and septic shock, where we then have to give them medications literally to cause their vessels to close, to give them a blood pressure. Because what happens, the vessels become so big and wide, fluid is just leaking out. So then we have to give them medications. That's what they call them, pressors, to give. So the reality is that I think it is at least 1/3 of ICU patients end up with renal issues. Generally, for a proper ICU to function, there should be a dialysis machine or access to dialysis treatment, because renal impairment is actually quite common in an ICU patient because of the severity of their illness. One of the organs that will shut down early is the kidneys. So what was also in this video was, oh my God, remdesivir, it mashes up your kidneys. Once you're in an ICU setting, your kidneys are one of the first organs that will fail. Remdesivir is actually eliminated by the kidneys. So if your kidneys have already failed or they are failing, then remdesivir is not going to make the situation better where the kidney function is concerned. However, what the I think it's WHO, and they're saying for the use of remdesivir is not in the stable patient. Literally, it is for the very ill patient where you're literally doing anything you can possible to try to save them. Right. It is like patients who have cancer, and especially end stage, and they decide they're giving them multiple different chemotherapy. And we all know that chemotherapy, and people must realize, chemotherapy is literally giving you medications or treatment, whether it be radiation or drugs, that tries to destroy those cancer cells. Now, if you're given a medication to destroy cancer cells, it means that you're at risk of destroying healthy cells too. As well. Right? But because you're in that state where, you want to give you a fighting chance, you're going to do that. Yeah. Remdesivir is actually not given routinely for the management of COVID. It is actually being given to the very ill person to give them a fighting chance. So right. This myth that remdesivir is going to mash up all your kidneys and all of that, that is actually not true. Can it make kidney function worse? Yes, it can, because it is cleared by the kidneys. But remember that a person in ICU already more than likely has some element of kidney damage, kidney failure, or renal impairment, and therefore there's a higher risk of them getting further damage with the medication. However, you are at an extreme where it's literally we're saying, okay, let's try something. Let's not just say, I raise my hands in the air, because there's not many drugs available. So we're giving you something to at least try, right? So and the misinformation and not understanding. Yes, it's
there will be many myths to be debunked tonight, because I'm sure all of you have different things that you've been hearing that are absolutely not true, and we will debunk all of those as we go through the program. But there's so much to talk about as we speak about COVID-19, isolation, vaccination, and of course misinformation. We have more for you after the break. Back with you here on the People's Business as we speak about COVID-19, isolation, vaccination, and misinformation. And for you viewers, you can call with your questions as we have the experts on the panel. 228-5562 or 228-5563 are the numbers to call. And we do already have a caller on the line. So let's go to the caller first, and then let's get back to talking a bit about what's happening with isolation. Good night, caller. What's your question?
Peace be on each and every one. My question is, why after you, those persons who carry the tracking device?
We seem to have lost that caller. So let's talk about isolation, Dr. Grandison.
Sorry, before you say anything about isolation, I wanted to say, let us try to avoid saying that people's beliefs are ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Or we'll never be able to reach them. We have to meet them where they are and explain as much as they can understand or want to understand what the issues are. So I just wanted to say that. Sorry about that, Adanna.
That's okay. That's okay. Dr. Grandison, so let's look at the isolation numbers yet again. You spoke about 4,320 persons in that green category. 115 people are banded with the electronic tags. I know that there was to be a shipment of 2,000 plus tags. What has happened with that?
We are still in the process of acquiring some of those additional tags at this point in time. But I think at the current moment, we have just over 200, and I know that this weekend we were supposed to get an additional 200 tags onto the island. But we have been banning and removing quite often some of the actual persons who have met criteria for the electronic monitoring bans.
So you have 4,320 people. And the last conversation we had, you did say that there were some breaches of this home isolation. How many breaches? You have an idea of how many issues you would have had in that regard with people leaving home isolation without the requisite permission?
Initially, when the program started, I was very involved in the breaches that we had. And those were in the minority, to be quite honest with you, but they were there. Okay. However, now with the development of our operations center and direct communications of J Security to our operations center, I am not as hands-on as it relates to the breaches. But the last that I would have known would have been about 6 that have been brought to my attention. But I do believe that they are probably a little bit more. What we did notice quite early on was that those breaches essentially were not only in that 18 to 40 age group that we were initially tagging, which is quite interesting, but we actually got persons within the 40 to 50 age group who were actually breaching isolation. And when we refer to isolation, we're speaking about that confirmed COVID positive patient, not a patient that has tested rapid positive, but a person who has tested PCR positive for COVID-19.
How dangerous is that, though? A situation where you have someone who would have breached isolation and going back into the community, knowing that more than likely it is the Delta variant affecting them?
I think it is absolutely dangerous. One of the concerns, as Dr. St. John very nicely mentioned, I think, is really understanding where persons are having a deficit in being able to appreciate the information that's being presented to them. And for instance, one of the concerns we had initially was the test report that was being sent to persons would say either not detected, SARS-CoV-2 not detected, which is the virus surrounding COVID, and or detected. And then there was a key at the bottom. And so a lot of persons actually looked at the key that was actually at the bottom of the report versus what the actual report was saying for that patient. So there are some situations where essentially they were unsure of their status. However, I think that this is now a lot clearer for a lot of persons, because if you are reading your report and it has SARS-CoV-2 result not detected, it means you're negative. If it says SARS-CoV-2 result detected, then we know you're positive. And we're asking those persons to stay within the confines of their home.
I really hope that they take the advice as well. Dr. St. John, we want to get your take. What's CARPHA's position on this new strategy of home isolation here in the region? Are you seeing it in a lot of other Caribbean territories as well?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm not going to have a CARPHA position.
Okay.
But I will tell you if it is in effect. And yes, it is in effect. I kept saying that I really didn't want COVID to come into our space because I saw the scale that it could reach in those very early days when it was in China. And I said Caribbean people don't understand scale. So we got to a point where, well, we burst our traditional isolation capabilities. And Hilary and I had a conversation on Facebook where I said, I don't believe in home quarantine because of two things. Caribbean people, not just Bajan people, Caribbean people hate to be home, even if they're feeling ill and they walk around. And this is what we have seen in the other jurisdictions that are using home quarantine. They move around. And then the other thing is, especially after Delta got here, is that Delta changes everything, including the disease course. So someone can be fine and then crash in an hour. When I say crash, I mean crash in a way that you cannot necessarily be able to save them or get them where they need to go if they need saving. And I was afraid of that, but we have to be practical. We just don't have 2,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 beds for isolation in the public facilities. So we have to be practical. The jurisdictions that have implemented this have implemented it sometimes with fewer checks and balances, as Adanna has been describing, especially with the expansion she just told us about. And it is important that we try to keep a handle on this, especially as we are at risk of importing and there are about 3 or 4 Delta plus variants. So I would not like to see a merging of the Delta wave with the Delta plus. So I give you a little bit of my personal opinion, but that is not CARPHA's opinion. But CARPHA is also very pragmatic.
And this Delta Plus variant is very serious as well. We'll talk a bit about the Delta.
There are 3 or 4. So we are checking, because we've been doing the whole genome sequencing along with University of West Indies, where we've got our own capacity, which will start on the 15th of November. But we are checking to see when they will be imported.
Okay, well, we'll take a quick pause and we'll be back as we talk about COVID-19, vaccination, isolation, and misinformation. So what to do? Back here on the People's Business, we understand that we have been having some challenges with our callers calling in. We will try to get that sorted out as soon as possible so that you can pose your questions to Dr. St. John, Dr. Hilary Moore, and also Dr. Adanna Grandison. Dr. St. John, before we went to break, I had some challenges with my earpiece as well. You were talking about the 3 or 4 Delta variants, and we've been doing the genomic sequencing. Are we seeing the emergence of some of the Delta Plus variants here in Barbados and across the region? What can you tell us?
No, we haven't detected Delta Plus yet. It's going to be important that we keep getting the samples, but we haven't detected Delta Plus. We've seen some mu, not in Barbados. We've seen some mu, and I mention that because mu, studies of mu have shown that there has been some escape from the vaccines. And we really don't need that right now. So we're watching that very closely in the jurisdictions in which we have detected mu. But I repeat, mu is not in Barbados, at least not in the samples that we have been sent.
Well, at least that's good news, and we could only pray that we don't get any of these other variants, but they could creep in. We've been relaxing some of our protocols, of course, as the winter tourist season approaches. More and more people coming into the island, and we know this is how COVID-19 moves. Are you concerned about the relaxation of these protocols? And now everyone is expecting that the curfew here in Barbados will be eased a bit as well. Are you concerned?
Each country has a sovereign right to implement their protocols. And remember, I'm regional. I'm not focusing on Barbados alone. And I've seen the changes in the protocols. I'm right now in Trinidad, and Trinidad has safe zones. And Trinidad has, the Prime Minister has announced that there will be the lifting of the state of emergency. And it's not likely that it will be put back on, at least for the rest of the year. There will be a lifting going forward. But all of this is with the context and the perspective of improving vaccination coverage. And also, there has been, at least in Trinidad, there has been the implementation of the 3rd primary dose, not yet a booster. Some jurisdictions like Barbados has commenced the giving of boosters. So each sovereign country makes their determination, hopefully taking the science into account and their community spread. So I'm seeing all kinds of things across the region.
Dr. Moore, as far as the booster goes, because I know that you're doing the vaccination here, have you been doing those booster shots in your mobile vaccine rounds? And is the booster for all vaccines? And I mean, all of you know the science, so basically you can help me and the viewers here tonight talk about this booster drive. Are all vaccines set for boosters?
Okay, so first, my unit is not doing any boosters. What we're trying to do is we're really still trying to get to people that have zero coverage, who have never received a vaccine as yet. Also because, remember, with the Delta variant, we need to also take care of the healthcare provider too. So I really don't want myself and my teams going to multiple different homes, multiple different times, because we also need to reduce the risk to ourselves. And because we go from home to home or place to place, we also don't want to be a vector of transmission either. So we're not actually giving boosters. The studies are showing that the Pfizer immunity particularly has been waning quite significantly. Some studies are saying about 6% every 2 months, and therefore that's the reason. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Just a little interruption. So that's the reason why the Pfizer doses are being well, in most countries, the third dose, and there even the theory of the fourth dose. When it comes to the AstraZeneca, given another dose is still, there's a lot of information that isn't there just as yet. The actual company has recommended that, people who are immunocompromised or may not have necessarily have mounted the best response initially for whatever reason, whether they're like diabetic and uncontrolled, whether or not they have an autoimmune disease and on immunosuppressive, which means medications that prevent their immune system from functioning properly, then those people definitely would need boosters. But again, there is some element where even the AstraZeneca immunity is waning, but it's not anywhere near as drastically as the Pfizer. So there is the potential of being given boosters. Some of the newer studies are also showing where mixing the vaccines actually is giving a better immune response, where if you get a vector driven, such as the AstraZeneca, the Sinopharm, or the Johnson & Johnson, then if you give like a Pfizer or Moderna, which is an mRNA, then you're getting better immunity. So there are different schools of thought, and I think what is happening is with the Delta variant, the impending fear of the Delta Plus variant and the other Delta variants, you're trying to maximize everyone's immunity as much as possible. But I think overall what people need to remember is that the more a virus spreads, the more it mutates. We're going to keep seeing more and more mutations the more it spreads. What we really need to do is we really need to cut the spread of the virus. Vaccinations really do help reduce spread, transmission, and severity of illness. But primarily to reduce spread, we need desperately to be wearing our masks, sanitizing, and social distancing. I think, especially right now with I can't call this a wave, the tsunami that we're having presently, vaccinations will help us in the future. But right now, what we really need to do is reduce the spread, and that is doing those simple measures that reduce us transmitting from one person to another. And I think what we also need to do, which is really unfortunate, especially when people are just fed up of COVID and the fatigue is very real, is that even in your own homes, especially when you have older relatives, especially if you've been out and about, you may want to still also social distance from your elderly relatives or wear your mask even inside your homes right now, because the Delta variant is actually so easily transmittable that you're getting a lot of it in your own homes. So vaccines, yes, are going to help us, and they're going to help us more in the long run. But what we really, really, really need to do right now is go back to the very basics of sanitizing, mask wearing, social distancing. Remember they said in the beginning, don't rub your eyes and all these different things with your hands after you touch surfaces. All of these are the things that we really need to implement at this moment in time. And yes, get your vaccine to help you in the future. Because remember, it's going to take 2 weeks after your second dose or 2 weeks after your one dose, because we are actually giving Johnson & Johnson so as to protect our patients from going multiple times as well as ourselves. So they have the one dose, which is WHO approved as a one dose. So we're giving that also. But primarily, it's going to be a lot of hand washing, face masks, wearing, social distancing. Those are the things that we really, really, really need to implement and get back to. And it's scary when you're walking around or driving around and you're not seeing people in masks and people liming, and this is why our numbers really aren't going where we want them to go, which is down.
Yeah, the problem is I think we are watching what is happening in other places around the world, and that's something else that we would have to talk about too, to understand why they can do that and we can't. But we have to take a quick pause, and we'll be back with more as we talk about COVID-19 right here on The People's Business. We've been speaking a lot about isolation and vaccination right here on The People's Business as we put COVID-19 in focus. Let's talk a bit about misinformation, and I'm sure all of you doctors have heard varying stories about different myths associated with COVID-19, the vaccine. So I'll give each of you basically an opportunity to give us a story of what you would have heard in terms of misinformation and how we should address these myths. Let's start with you, Dr. Grandison. What are some of these myths that you've been hearing?
Well, yes, sorry. Certainly, as Hilary stated, there are so many myths out there that persons have been essentially sending around that can drive not only misinformation, but the disinformation. Certainly one that stands right to the top of my mind is, what's the sense of getting vaccinated if you can still get infected? And I think that is very important to know exactly how this vaccine works. This vaccine works essentially by fortifying the lungs. And I want you to think about it almost like a house. The virus is essentially some person that can enter the house with a key, which is the spike protein. Most persons that get access to your house can go into your family room, your living room, your dining room, but certainly not everybody ever has access to your bedroom. Your bedroom may have in a safe which contains the very important information that you need. Now, when it comes to this particular vaccine, we have that safe that's essentially in the bedroom. Think about that safe being your lungs. It's the treasure of the body when we are thinking about SARS-CoV-2 virus, because that's one of the primary organs that the virus affects. And yes, persons who are vaccinated can be infected. So yes, the virus can come in, it can mill around in the family room, the living room, it gives you the sore throat, it gives you the headache, you may get a little fever, your nose may be a little congested. But generally what we are seeing with the vaccinated population, for the most cases, certainly is that these persons do not go on to have these severe organ-specific lower respiratory symptoms, the cough, the shortness of breath, the difficult breathing. And I think it's very important because these are the processes that drive essentially a person to having mortality. We know that, for instance, once the virus actually replicates, increases in number essentially quite rapidly, we will have lots of mucus being produced. This mucus goes down into the lungs. Some of those viral particles go down into the lungs, and they essentially plug up those lovely ear sacs that we have called alveoli. You know, the alveoli are responsible for transferring air from the lungs proper into the surrounding vessels that essentially provide your entire body with the oxygen that it needs. And also, the actual veins also remove the carbon dioxide from those same tissues, and then you exhale. Now that needs to happen very seamlessly, and we do it every single day when we're breathing normally. However, if you have lots of mucus in that space, what ends up happening is that you are slowing down that process. So that person will naturally have the shortness of breath. When you have the vaccine on board and you have that protection in place, what's happening is that by the time the virus even attempts to come down into your bedroom or your safe space, but you're safe, you already have your bodyguards in there standing, waiting for that invader to neutralize that invader and get that invader out. And that is the beauty of the vaccine, because it protects and it fortifies the lungs, reducing the possibility of having that severe disease process occurring.
I think that's pretty clear to me. I want bodyguards. I want to keep my safe space safe from any attackers, so that's the role of the vaccine. Dr. St. John, what are some of the myths that you've been hearing on your end?
Well, let me start by saying that the anti-vaxxers started their misinformation from around March 2020. So there has been a long time for people to believe in this mystical thinking that the virus is almost in the role of the devil. And then it became the fashion to then say the government is in the role of the devil, the government is controlling you by giving you this vaccine, the government is controlling you by insisting on wearing the mask, etc., etc. But what really disturbs me is that some of the people who are within our member states, including Barbados, while they're telling people not to take the vaccine and that the COVID-19 is just the flu, and they have taken their vaccine. And you've got some people who are so misguided that they are blocking their relatives, either older or younger, from taking the vaccine. I've heard things like it's just the flu. But we have to understand the range of ways in which COVID-19 exhibits. Most people are going to get something that's really mild. But then there are a set of people, and in the Caribbean, not just Barbados, it's going to be even more than the textbooks are perhaps saying in other jurisdictions because of our chronic disease burden. There's some people who are going to get severe and critical disease, and then some of them will go on to die. We can't say who will be the people who get the really bad sequelae. So saying thousands or hundreds of thousands more people die from poverty, so why can't a few die of COVID? I find it really disturbing that in this day and age, the value of human life, even your relatives, is so little that you think they can take a hit for the team. My cause is more important than the person's life. The other things that we've been hearing is that the vaccine will do so much more to you. The vaccine will give you impotence. The vaccine will give you, it will make you lose your baby. The overwhelming statistics, and these are millions of people who have taken the vaccine, as compared to the people who have had COVID-19, it's showing the opposite. It's showing that COVID-19 is more likely to give you those issues of impotence. COVID-19 just doesn't attack the lungs. There are people who are completely healthy, no chronic diseases, and when they get COVID-19, they get heart attacks, they get kidney failure, as if they had a chronic disease for years. You've got people losing their hair. A lot of us are very conscious of our appearance. And of course, there's the thing that I am so deathly afraid of, apart from dying, is the brain fog, the inability to remember, to understand, to function at the level that you used to. And people are just dismissing these things.
Yeah.
And I find it really disingenuous because a lot of those have taken their vaccine.
That is something else, Dr. St. John, but we really hope that we can convince more people tonight, those who are sitting on the fence, to take the vaccine. We do have some callers on the line. Remember those numbers to call, 228-562, 228-5563, as we talk about COVID-19 on the People's Business. We'll take a quick break, and we will be back in a moment.
That has actually been debunked. And guess what? The risk of blood clots is even a lot higher with people taking the birth control pill than the actual vaccine. All right. And remember, the virus itself gives you a lot more blood clots. So my thing about it now is just people are holding on to little pieces of information, and then they're making it like, oh my goodness, this is the worst thing. The same thing with the medications, causing kidney issues. But the virus itself causes a lot of kidney issues. And as Dr. St. John was saying, very rightly so, people are always saying, but, oh, we heard that some person got a vaccine and they ended up with the carditis, which is the inflammation around the heart. But do you know that the actual virus gives you carditis a lot more often, right? It's almost 20 to 30 times more often than the actual vaccine. Yeah. So instead of just pulling you hear something negative and you hold it as that's all wholly and solely, and you don't look for the other sides. I think that's what, we really need to get people to realize, that with everything in life, there's always a risk. So I'm never going to say that the vaccines don't carry a risk. Everything carries a risk. Even the Panadol you take carries a risk. The ibuprofen you take carries a risk. Drinking too much water carries a risk. So therefore, what we need to do is decide whether or not the benefits outweigh the risks, and be realistic about it, Don't just say because there is a risk, oh, I'm not taking it, but the risk of getting the disease, getting that same problem is a lot higher. So let's put everything into context. And I think that's what, we need to get people to, implore them to do. is to really just take it into context. Don't find one little thing that may have happened in one in every 200 and 300,000 people and blow it completely out of context, when the actual virus itself can cause it in 1 in every 100 to 200 people, which is 10 times more likely with the actual virus than with the vaccine. So I think we need to put things in context.
Happen too often. In terms of the anti-vaxxers using, as you said, that one point of reference out of context, really. But we do have a caller on the line. I think we've sorted out those issues, those technical issues there. Caller, what's your question?
Hello?
Hello, good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
Good evening. Peace be unto you. Yours. My question is, after those persons who have the tracking device being discharged, why is the long wait, sometimes almost a whole week, before someone can come to take the device off? Thank you very much, and y'all stay safe and keep the work up.
Thank you so much. Dr. Grandison, that's for you.
Yeah, sure. I don't know of a situation like that. I know that there are some persons who will have approximately an additional day after they are formally discharged, especially those persons who have been discharged through the polyclinic. So we do encourage persons to call the COVID call center for those isolated persons, which is 536-1800. However, in a situation like that, I would definitely want to get the information for that person, because I can appreciate that after you have been isolated and restricted for such a long time, certainly there is a desire, a very strong desire, and I can appreciate that, to return to as normal a function as possible, whether it's going something as simple as going to the supermarket, going back to work, and there really shouldn't be any delay in terms of you getting back to that normalcy. So if there are persons who have been formally discharged, i.e. you've had your discharge certificate, not just simply saying I've completed my isolation process, I'm done, and then there's a thought that you can return back out into community. But once you've been formally discharged, then yes, please, if you're having any delays in getting that ban off of your foot, please do call the call center. But generally, the process is, once the person has been assessed by either our assessors within the medical assessment team, which is headed by our clinical lead, Dr. Brian Charles, or even if they've been assessed for discharge by some of our MOH or polyclinic personnel, then that person will get a discharge certificate, and their information is then passed on to the security firm for removal of that bracelet.
I'm pretty sure that we will want to get that number from you again, that those people can call. You said it is
536-1800.
536-1800. Don't know where I got 41 from. But we do have another caller on the line. Caller, welcome to the People's Business. What is your question?
Yes, good night, sir.
Good night.
Yes, what I want to call to say is that people going and taking the vaccine, people getting fully vaccinated, and people are still getting infected and are dying. So tell me, what is the reason why for this vaccine, so that I can go and get my vaccine, sir?
Who have been formally discharged?
Great question. Who wants to take that one?
I'll take that one.
I want Miss Johnson, take it, sir.
Mr. John, you mean?
Yes.
Dr. St. John. Okay, so Dr. St. John, the caller specifically asked for you. So explain why he should still go and get vaccinated. Not hear you, Dr. St. John. Still not hearing you, Still not hearing you.
Sorry, I had muted. This whole thing about why take the vaccine if you can still get the disease. The vaccines against COVID-19 are not the only vaccines that we have been taking for years that don't stop us from getting the disease. But the important thing is that those soldiers that are guarding the safe, the security guards that the vaccine makes your body produce, that's a very important thing about the COVID-19 vaccine. It gives your body the most natural type of immunity, one that it makes itself. And I wish I could show the graph. The people who have had the vaccine, when the virus comes to attack, the way in which their lungs are so much more clear than the people who do not have the vaccine on board. The effects on the lungs are some of the most drastic effects that COVID-19 can show. And we have pictures of people, thousands of people who took the vaccine, got the infection, and did not have, it's almost as if the lungs turned to glass. And as Adanna said, nothing can get through, especially oxygen. So the vaccine, even though it may not stop you from getting the disease, makes your body stronger in a way that nothing else can, even a treatment. A treatment means that you've got the vaccine on board, and you know with the COVID-19, it can stay in your system and go from organ to organ after months. So yes, don't always look at if you get the disease or not. Look at what the disease can do to you if you don't have the vaccine on board.
We have another caller on the line here on the People's Business. Caller, what's your question?
Yeah, hello?
Yes, good night.
Yes,
Welcome
good
to the
night.
People's Business.
Yeah, this question is for Dr. Grandison. If a person is tested positive for COVID, how do they know that they're at the green level, the yellow level, or the red level? Because there's no contact between the medical personnel and the person. And I understand they've been isolated at home.
So there are several points of contact. Thank you for the call. There are several points of contact that we can have. For instance, after the person has been identified as being positive, so we've gotten a copy of the result profile, this person is now positive. The first set of persons to interact with that person, provided that they are stable, would be our polyclinic doctors. Those are the persons who will call you, inform you of your positive status, clarify any misunderstandings that you may have at that point in time, and they will do a quick triage, telemed triage of you. Now, this triage process is what really puts you into that red, yellow, or green. It is not meant to be a conversation where we just want to say red, yellow, or green, but we actually want to walk you through that journey for COVID-19. Now, the assignment, as I said, of the red, yellow, or green is based upon a combination of a few things. One, the symptoms which you are currently displaying and the onset of your symptoms. Two, your age as well, because we know that one of the independent risk factors are advanced age, persons over 65. We know that they are at increased risk. Three, persons who are unvaccinated, because we know, just like as Dr. St. John said, just as I explained, those persons tend to go on to have more severe disease. Four, if a person has a comorbid state that is associated with COVID, so if that person has hypertension, diabetes, which we know makes up a very large component of our adult population, and now we're starting to see it in the pediatric population as well. Obesity, chronic kidney disease, if that person is immunocompromised, like what Dr. Hilary Moore has stated. Okay, these are all reasons why we may think that it is just not a telephone call that would suffice, but the person needs to be seen by a doctor. And then the very last group of persons would be For instance, someone who may not even have any symptoms, is fully vaccinated, doesn't have any comorbidities, and is under the age of 65. However, they're in a home with someone else who's vulnerable, or the house setting, they don't have either enough bedrooms to safely isolate, or they don't have enough bathrooms to safely isolate within the home. Or what we are now seeing, unfortunately, are some family members who are simply stating, I don't want this person in my home. Unfortunately, we have also seen situations where there are family members who have kicked people out of the home. And you know, these are some of the challenges that we have as it relates to stigmatization. Now, the second part of it is a follow-up that you may get from one of the health assessors from the home isolation team. Now, if in between that health assessment and the first assessment that you get for triage and the health assessment, you start to have symptoms, again, the dedicated number, which lots of persons have been using, either to get swabbing for additional members in their household who are symptomatic, or there has been a change in terms of the presentation of symptoms. They're now experiencing a cough, they're feeling very, very tired, sometimes shortness of breath, chest pain. Those are some of the common symptoms that we tend to hear about. Those persons will call that number, and directly the call center will send an email correspondence to both myself, sometimes Dr. Brian Charles, as well as our operations center, and we will respond immediately. Now, certainly there are times that we may see an email that comes in that tells us this patient is not doing well. This patient needs emergency care. Now, what we do at that point in time is based upon the symptoms presented during that conversation with the call center, or sometimes persons even call the operations center directly. What we do is essentially we make a decision to move that person emergently. We have recognized that, for instance, they may call in and say, my family member's oxygen is now down at 90, or it's down at 88. We're going to send an ambulance for you. Because remember that the longer the time to respond, the greater the chances of an adverse event occurring, and we want to minimize that. Since the program has started, we've only had 3 of our persons within the program who were COVID positive, identified within the home isolation program, who unfortunately have demise. And even the very first one that we had within the program, for me personally, was a bit too much. And so we want to keep those numbers low, and that is the mechanism that we use to try to get persons out of the community as quickly as possible.
The reality is, however, that deaths will continue to rise here in Barbados because of the spread of Delta and the serious effects that it has, the deleterious effects that it has on an individual, especially if they're carrying a number of comorbidities. It is a serious situation that we are continuing to monitoring, and I know that we all are trying to do our best. Vaccination is the way out, and that's what we will continue to talk about right here as we continue our discussion here on the People's Business. We do have another caller on the line. Caller, welcome to the People's Business. What is your question?
Good night. I would like to ask a question. I mean, anybody answer this. A few things they want to ask for. I mean, it is everybody right to take the vaccine if they want to. And if who don't want to take it, they don't have to take it. But I want to know, one, why they insisting that people should take these vaccines. Don't mind the nurse, I can't remember her name, so for complication. I don't see nobody getting blood clots and these other things. As she's saying, if you don't take the vaccine, you ain't take it, and you don't have the way when you take the vaccine, you having these sort of things, these blood clots and everything that come in with the vaccine, that then they ain't saying the vaccine did not give you, which everybody know that is not so. The second.
Well, I think we've lost the caller, but it was something that you mentioned before, Dr. Moore, just to explain, and maybe you can just clarify that quickly before we continue to look at other issues with the home isolation program and vaccination. But before you get to that, I guess we do have another caller on the line. The calls are coming fast and furious. Caller, welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
Hello?
Good night,
Hello?
caller.
Yeah, I tuned in. Well, first off, good night to everybody in the panel.
Good night.
Yeah,
Good night.
I tuned in a little late, and I caught someone's making mention about remdesivir and misinformation and stuff like that. No, I read a lot, and I take in a lot of information. And based on information that I have received while doing my research and stuff, remdesivir was approved on more than one occasion as an investigational drug. First it was for herpes, MERS, and then Ebola. Now, the trial for Ebola, now I saw that the primary outcome was death after 28 days. And the trial had to be ceased because the people that were conducting the study found out that using remdesivir actually increased their chances of death. So if it is somebody like me, read that information, I would be kind of skeptical as it relates to using remdesivir as a treatment for COVID, especially if it is I read and hear that the WHO did not approve it as a treatment for COVID.
Thank you, caller, for your comment. And I'm thinking the question is, are we using remdesivir here to treat COVID or anywhere in the region? Dr. St. John?
Yes, and I wanted to talk about the fact that there was a clinical trial involving WHO that countries in the region were involved in. And with that clinical trial, there was a standard of care, medication, etc., etc., and how to implement that medication based on the severity of the illness and also the stage of the disease course. And so at the regional level, there was an attempt made to bring some science and involvement of WHO in the compassionate use of medications such as remdesivir. Compassionate use refers to when someone is deathly ill in very dire circumstances, and you need to employ treatments or medications that you necessarily would not use if the person just had mild disease or disease that had been severe and was easily managed. So yes, there. I know people do their research, but there are layers of scientists who have been involved in the decision making of the drugs that we are seeing. And when a drug reaches WHO emergency listing, or if it gets full approval, the Caribbean regulatory system, which is the way that CARPHA makes sure that the drugs that are coming into the market are the ones that have been approved. The Caribbean regulatory system then goes on to recommend it to our member states. Over.
And speaking about approved drugs, I remember seeing you in another section of the media speaking about a COVID-19 pill. So maybe we can get some more information on that after this break. welcome back. We got to thank our viewers for watching us here on TV8 and also on Facebook and YouTube as well. We do have those links that you can watch us every Sunday right here on the People's Business. And we've returned to a caller on the line. Caller, good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What is your question?
Hello, good night.
Hello, good night.
Yes, I just want to ask how many vaccinated persons are in home quarantine, home isolation? Thank you.
So, Dr. Grandison, how many vaccinated persons are in home isolation?
At this current time, I could not give you a very definitive number. And it is, unfortunately, one of the limitations. We do collect the information, but we are trying to move now to a more automated system, certainly where the statistical data behind a lot of this we can get. But I can tell you there are some persons who are vaccinated, and this is based upon some of the interactions that I've had, but the majority of persons that are essentially going into facility and are decompensating are persons who are unvaccinated, and that is just the profile that I'm getting. But in terms of having the actual data to tell you 65%, unfortunately at this time I cannot give you that data. And this is data that we are working on, and as soon as we have this data available, because I believe in being absolutely clear, I don't want to speak and misspeak, I will provide that data to the public.
We appreciate that, Dr. Grandison. Dr. St. John, recently you were talking about something that I saw in the international media recently as well before I returned to the island. This COVID-19 treatment via a tablet, a pill form. What can you tell us about it? Is it going to make its way here to Barbados and the rest of the region? And how is it used?
So I just would have mentioned the Caribbean regulatory system, and that is the branch of CARPHA, which ensures that once a medication has got a WHO approval, and this is how we would have recommended the various vaccines to the member states. Once there is WHO approval, we will recommend that the treatment, medication, we do a whole range of medicines, nothing to do with COVID-19, and we've also done COVID-19 PCR tests. We ensure that once it's approved, we look at the dossier of the drug, ensure that it's the same as what has been approved in other jurisdictions, and then we recommend. The treatment that we are looking at right now has not got WHO approval yet. It has been approved for the first in the UK. So what we're doing is we're looking at the updates to WHO's lists of medications, and we're also going to make contact with the manufacturer once it has been approved, and then recommend to the member states for their utilization. We've been looking a long time for a treatment that works, as well as a vaccine, especially now that we're realizing there is this unrelenting vaccine hesitancy. So that is the latest. Not really any change from what I would have said earlier, but as I said, we're waiting for the WHO approval.
And I know once you get those details, you will share them with me either on the morning report or here on the People's Business. I do thank you for that. We do have another caller on the line. Caller, good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What is your question?
Yes, hi. Good evening to you, Sean, and good evening to your guest. Yes,
Good night. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I just like to ask a few brief questions, please. One of the doctors mentioned that there's a small likelihood or small incidence of blood clots associated with the vaccines. I want to know, in those cases, how severe are the outcomes? That's one. My second question, do persons have the option to request or even demand to have their vaccines mixed? Or are you basically obliged to take the same type of vaccine that you had originally? Thirdly, I visited the Winston Scott Polyclinic on the 24th of October and had a COVID swab done. Up to now, I have not heard anything. I've been calling all manner of numbers, can't seem to get through to anyone. Should I assume that the fact that nobody has contacted me, could I then sort of assume that I'm probably negative?
Thank you so much, caller. Dr. Moore, I'll let you deal with the first few questions in relation to clots and the response of the vaccine.
Okay, so when it comes to the actual blood clots, again, to say how bad the clot would be would depend on where the clot develops. It seems that if a lot of people are just develop them in the legs, however, they may also get them in the lungs, and it also depends on the size. But the amount of people that get clots from the vaccine are actually way less than the amount of people that get clots from the actual virus itself. And as I said, if you compare medications to something like the birth control pill, where so many women are on birth control pills, or you even have some people who have breast cancer and they're on tamoxifen, which is a hormone-based treatment, you find that the blood clots in that population is actually a lot higher than that of the vaccine. So if I remember, the vaccine numbers was like 1 or 2 in every 200,000 to 300,000 people, where you can actually get clots from like the birth control pill in 1 in every 4,000.
I want to put that into perspective, Dr. Moore. So that would be like 3 people in the entire population of Barbados.
Yes, almost. Yep, that may develop a clot from the vaccine, where 1 in every 4,000, 4 to 5,000 develop clots when they're on the birth control pill. So that tells you that it actually is not that common. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? But then when you have to compare the risk now of actually getting the infection and getting clots from that, or the other complication of the COVID-19 virus itself, then you realize that the risk and benefits, because that's what we really need to look at. I think what people want is something that gives you no risk. That doesn't exist. Even when it comes to, I keep saying Panadol. Panadol actually causes liver issues, but people use Panadol every day. There's always a risk with whatever you do. So it doesn't mean that there's no risk with the vaccines, but the benefits far outweigh the risk, and there's risk with everything. I think that was the first part. What was the second part again?
And unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I want to give all of you an opportunity to make those final comments. So Dr. Grandison, I want to start with you, because a question that came up via social media while we were having this conversation was in relation to the resources. So I want you to wrap up with that response, the resources to deal with the growing number of people in home isolation, now 6,600 plus.
Now, we know very much here in Barbados, we do have a finite number of healthcare professionals. I think it is important, especially given that we are still in what we would say the slope of the surge, because we're not at the peak based upon the predictions that have been given by the University of the West Indies. It is important that we essentially plan to be able to combat that surge that we're having, and we have started to do that. And the first thing that we have done is essentially to really look at how do we continue, even with growing numbers, to be able to provide efficiently for some persons and for most persons. Certainly we don't want a situation where, and we do know that we are getting a little bit more lag time in terms of persons getting that communication from a healthcare provider, health assessor, and we really need to close that gap. It is something that certainly bothers me. And so right now we are actually in the process of making a lot of things a lot more automated, so that something as simple as a discharge process really wouldn't take you maybe an additional few hours or an additional day. Getting that band off certainly is something that's done in an expedited fashion. getting that contact and being able to communicate to the team in a lot quicker way, we are very much interested in doing, and really getting that statistics that helps us to continue to plan in terms of how do we move forward, what are our next steps. All of those things are very important. And so that is the next phase of the home isolation program that we are looking into.
Well, we'll wait to hear more from you, and both you as well, Dr. Moore and Dr. St. John. Unfortunately, we are out of time. When this happens, I always say it's always good to do a part 2, so hopefully you can join us sometime soon, as COVID-19 is not going anywhere. But thank you for your time, doctors, and really thank you, viewers, as well, for watching us here on The People's Business as we discussed isolation, vaccination, and misinformation. I'm Shane Seeley. Good night.